we want to start?
Great, yeah, we'll get started. So, a very good evening to everyone here. Thank you very much for joining us for the launch of the Bright Spots report. This is the third edition of the Bright Spots report that Indus Action publishes annually. And I'm Madhuri Dhariwal from Indus Action. To start off today's conversation, I thought it would be nice for us to just look at what bright spots are, what they are, why do we need to look at bright spots, and how do we then act on them. So that's what I'll take you through a little briefly. So the dictionary meaning of a bright spot is essentially a good part of something that is otherwise entirely bad or unpleasant. So when we look at our surroundings and when we look at different things around us, human nature or human tendency is attracted to the negative. So we end up looking at what's not going well, what is unpleasant in our surroundings. And a bright spot is that one good or happy bright spot as part of something that may otherwise not uh, be that great. Right? So that's what it is. And why should we be looking at a bright spot? So I have a quick video to share. We won't play the entire thing, but a brief of it.
Let's say your kid comes home one day and shows you a report card that looks a little something like this. Anything jump out at you? Well, if you're like most parents, really all you see when you look at this is this. This is a thought experiment from the author Marcus Buckingham. I think what it shows us is that we all tend to focus on problems rather than strengths. It would be the rare parent indeed that would look at this report card and say, wow, honey, you've got such a strength in English. How can we make more of that? We all use our powers of analysis primarily to study what isn't working, rather than to study what is working. So think about all the times in your lives you've been on phone calls with friends, and they've been agonizing about the problems of their relationships, and the many, many flaws of their partners. But have you ever been on a single call where the person was obsessing about why things were working so well, with an eye towards doing more of that in the future? Or as parents, we really want to get to the bottom of why our kids got an F, so we can correct it. But we don't obsess about why our kids got an A. What were they doing differently in that class than the others? Most of the time, this problem-solving focus serves us very well. If you're a manager and things are working pretty well across the board except for one trouble spot, by all means, solve that problem. But there's one situation in life where this backfires on us, and that's in times of change. Because in times of change, our report cards don't look near flawless. Our report cards look pretty mixed. There's a lot of stuff that's not working very well. There's a lot of stuff that may be failing outright. And if we allow ourselves to slip into problem-solving focus in that time, that's a recipe for inaction or paralysis. There's simply too many problems to be solved. In times of change, what we need to do instead is to focus on the bright spots, the early glimmers that something is working right. And once we find those bright spots, our mission is to study them and to clone them. So let's say at work you started a new sales process 6 months ago, and the results so far have been a little bit mixed. You've had 2 reps that have doubled their sales, and 6 more that have basically stayed at the same sales level, and then a couple of more that have slipped, and 3 that have just bottomed out. In fact, threatening to quit if you don't go back to the old sales process. So what do? As a manager, where do you spend your time? Well, most managers would slip into problem-solving mode, and they'd spend most of their time dealing with those 3 bellyachers at the bottom. Because we would figure that those 2 superstars at the top, well, they can take care of themselves. But this is exactly backward. We should be spending our time figuring out what these 2 reps are doing differently. What's making them so successful? Maybe they've cooked up their own sales literature. Maybe they've figured out a better way to approach customers. But regardless, if we understand what's making them succeed, then we can potentially spread those practices around and make everybody better. So as a manager, are you getting to spend enough of your time scaling and cloning what is working today?
So I hope that gave a glimpse of, the our general tendency or sense of what we look at versus don't, and why bright spots are important, and why is it essential that we look at those instances, those examples of what is going well, and how best can we scale and clone and then scale them. Right? And by clone, I definitely mean that we need to take it, contextualize it to our own context, and then look at those solutions. The third part of this is the how, right? How then do we look at these bright spots, and what do we do with them? So if you look, there are examples all around us of how bright spots are looked at, how they are scaled, and just on the screen are a few examples of some of these organizations, stories, groups that have come together to look at the things that are going well, that are successful, and harnessing the power of that positive energy to ensure that they're replicated in other circumstances. And that is what Indus Action has also tried to do with the Bright Spots report. We started the Bright Spots report in 2018 as an annual publication, and we were looking at social inclusion initially for 2018 and 19 through the lens of RT Section 121C. So the Right to Education Act Section 121C mandates that private schools should ensure that they keep 25% of their seats reserved for children from a disadvantaged background. And in the work that we've been doing in the past 7 years, that's been a primary focus of the organization. We realized that while there were a lot of challenges that we did see, there were multiple states doing excellent work in terms of ensuring that children get the access to schooling that they deserve. And that's what the first two bright spots focused on. The third version of the Bright Spots report, which we are here today to launch together, is the Bright Spots report 2020. And owing to the pandemic situation that we've been through in this past year, we decided to change the focus of the report a little bit and to look at the lens, again, look at inclusion, but a lens of social protection to it. So that I bring to you the Bright Spots report 2020. And the agenda for today's conversation will be as follows. We've done a quick introduction, the official launch of the report by Dr. P.V. Ramesh, who's our chief guest. He's with us already. And then we present the report in brief with the recommendations from Indus Action, and then the key findings from 5 other organizations who've been working on the ground towards the larger good of social protection and have contributed to the report as well. We then will have a panel discussion on convergence for social security or social welfare. That's going to be for 45 minutes. And we have a couple of esteemed guests with us who are joining us for that panel. And then we conclude in 5 minutes post that. So thank you so much once again. And Dr. Ramesh, if I could ask you to officially launch the report, and then we hear.
Good evening, namaste to everyone, and thank you, Madhuri, for inviting me to launch the report. And I am pleased to officially launch the Bright Spots Report 2020 of Indus Action. Congratulations.
Thank you. So if I could request you to speak a few words.
First, let me congratulate Indus Action in general, and particularly the authors of this report, and congratulate each and everyone who's contributed, because It's a highly collaborative work, very timely and very appropriate because, I mean, in the last 1 year or so, we've heard nothing but gloomy news, and we've been living through very cynical, distressing, depressing times, and particularly in our country. And it's been extremely difficult, particularly for people at the lower end of the spectrum, the poor, the women, the children, students. I think it's been a great challenge to glide and survive and live through. In these times, this is the first brightest report. I mean, this really throws light that on the good that has happened, the challenges that are still out there, and how these spots can form the model and the basis for future action. And this gives us a hope uh, as to how we can harness our strengths, how we can come together, the civil society, the government, the community, the people uh, can come together to make a change. I mean, the challenges are quite comprehensively outlined in this report, and I urge everyone to read these. The examples have been collated from across the globe of those with very sharp focus on inclusion, on social protection, on targeting, and those are the important issues. And I think our country, we are still struggling and learning. And this report, in my view, throws that light, the much needed light that really need to be seen, so that we have a, and it's a very balanced report. It looks at those shortcomings, it looks at those challenges, it looks at the strengths, it outlines what is possible and how those possibilities can really be the bright spots that we need to shine all across, and how people can learn from each other and how they can replicate and gain strength. And I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation. I congratulate once again, and we need this engagement on a sustained, continuous basis, because this report is perhaps one of the most not only comprehensive but the earliest ones. I mean, which really, as we have been gliding through this pandemic, and it really shines the light on the issues that are most concerning to everyone, to the policymakers, to researchers, to administrators, to those who politicians, and above all, to people themselves. I mean, people who are participants, people who are at the receiving end of these challenges. And let's not forget, we are still in the midst of the pandemic. I mean, for any one of us are assuming that we have emerged from this, and those of us, and certainly, I mean, one of the brightest spots that the government has shown, of course, is the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, and the slew of interventions, and also the specific states that have initiated their own programs, and the local community level actions as well, which we never should forget. And then the civil society institutions, the NGOs, the academia, the philanthropic organizations. I think it's been a coalition of the good, the nexus of the good and the coalition of the good, and they together have shown this bright spot. I'm terribly pleased, and I'm very happy to be part of this group, this conversation, and be associated with this report. Thank you very much, and congratulations once again. And I wish you all the best, and all people who are here and those who are behind you. I wish them all the best, and they continue to do this good work and stay engaged, connect with each other, learn from each other, and then share those examples. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So, in your experience in as in your career as a public servant, what must be the vision for social protection in India. So if you have any bright spot experiences that you can share from Andhra Pradesh or from your multilateral experience.
No, thank you very much. Um, I think there are. This is always there. There are examples from across the world. I mean, where I mean, I particularly look at the initial part of the the self-help group movement and the financial inclusion, the access to collateral-free credit. I mean, it was not easy when we first started in 1980s, early part of 1990s. I mean, in really 80s, it picked up sporadically. Mexico, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and then India, and particularly it started in Andhra, and it started as an initiative of the UN program for poverty alleviation, and that was South Asia focused, because South Asia holds and continues to have the largest number of people who are deprived in terms of poverty, in terms of health, nutrition, and education. So those were the I mean, that's how it started, as a small pilot. It was piloted in Andhra Pradesh, 3 districts, and then Pakistan, it was in the northern areas. In Sri Lanka, it was in particular in the north and eastern parts. So different parts, except for Bhutan, which said that they didn't have poor, they had unhappy people, which is great. I mean, they have a different perspective, and it's appropriate for the country. So those models, I mean, the women coming together, forming self-help groups, and really it brought together. It was a social affinity groups, because I mean, it's really empowered them in a way that has been transformational. I mean, it perhaps, after when I look back after 25 years, I do believe that perhaps we could have done a lot more, and we should be doing a lot more, and we should be doing very differently. But these are opportunities. I mean, one looks at those bright spot. I look at them as the brightest of the spots, because they were able to leverage the social capital and the financial capital to improve nutrition, to gain access to health services, education. I mean, it certainly has driven the demand. Whether the supply side has responded, that's of course is another challenge. There are good examples again. I mean, if we are talking about bright spots, so there's certainly large number of bright spots in everything. But the challenge, I mean, I believe the most important thing is to recognize that this requires a sustained effort, and this requires a longer term strategy. But what I like the most about what you're focusing is on how, I mean, this social protection is something which is not adequately recognized, particularly considering the complexity of our country, more than ever. I mean, more than any other country, because I mean, we are geographically vast, very, very diverse. Demographically, we are very differentiated. And then we have this biggest issue of religious, linguistic, and above all, the caste dimension. I mean, the caste that really segments the society into groups, and then it naturally is an exclusivist context. So, in a naturally, innately exclusivist structure, to identify those affinities, and to come together to act, and to provide this sort of comprehensive protection that can ensure that the people really can elevate themselves to realize their potential, to invest in their children, continues to be a challenge. I mean, but certainly I do believe that we need to learn from these good examples of what has happened.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Uh, we will move on with the presentation of the report itself as the next part. And for that, I invite Pragna Divakar, Andres Fortunato, and Devin Hawes to be presenting the. They are the ones who have been working tirelessly on the Bright Spots report since the past year. Andres and Devin are both students at the University of Chicago, and were to come to India to work with us at Indus Action, but the pandemic, one more reason of one more collateral damage of the pandemic was that they weren't able to come in. But the bright spot is that we still had a wonderful working journey throughout the months that they were interning with us. And Pragnya has been interning with us through the University of Ashoka University, sorry. And yeah, so great, guys. Over to you all. Pragnya, will you share your screen?
Okay, yeah, just a second. Okay. Great. Thank you, Madhuri, for your introduction, and Dr. Ramesh for launching the Bright Spots report. The launch has been a long time coming, and a huge amount of effort has gone into it. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. As the name indicates, the Bright Spot report focuses on best practices, systems, ways of thinking that we can adapt as organizations committed to seeing lasting change. The year 2020, more than any other year, demands reflection on things that went well and other things that we can improve on. I'm going to be talking about, firstly, very briefly about the impact that the pandemic has had on India. Secondly, the government's response, particularly how it deployed the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, the PMGKY, to provide relief. And finally, some issues with the rollout of the scheme, which need to be addressed if we want to strengthen our social security systems. Now, as we all know, there was no part of our lives that the pandemic did not affect over the past year. The first half of the year witnessed a major migrant crisis with workers suddenly out of a job and no way to get back to their homes. Urban workers were worse off, with 87% of them having lost their jobs and 83% reporting that they were consuming less food than before the lockdown. Food security in general saw a decline. Many ration shops were shut or overcrowded or out of supplies. The pandemic caused a major upheaval in the lives of children as well. Schools were shut, and consequently, this affected the midday meals program in several states, which is often the only nutritious meal that many children consume in a day. And remote learning was inaccessible to the majority of students. Now, being confined to the house had an adverse impact on children as well as women, with cases of domestic violence seeing a sharp spike. So clearly, the pandemic was a huge external shock that revealed many gaps in India's social security system. As a response to this, in March of 2020, the central government announced the increase of rupees 1.7 lakh crores to the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, the PMGKY, as part of a COVID relief package. The PMGKY includes a large number of schemes under it, as given here. So, for example, the Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, which provides wheat or rice in pulses every month. During the pandemic, it aimed to reach 80 million people. The Jan Dhan Yojana, under this scheme, all women Jan Dhan account holders were given 500 rupees every month for 3 months. PM Ujjwala, which provides free gas cylinders. Then farmers enrolled in the PM Kisan Yojana were paid an additional 2,000 rupees, and the MNREGA wages were also increased by 20 rupees. The central government also provided free rations from the month of April to November of last year. Now, utilizing the PMGKY along with the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile package was a welcome move by the central government because it didn't require people to enroll in any new scheme. People were already enrolled and the government knew how to reach them. But the only thing left was the actual execution. But this is what the problem was, because there were several issues with the rollout of these schemes, which led to many beneficiaries being excluded. So firstly, the schemes automatically exclude those who are unbanked or underbanked. People in remote areas especially don't have easy access to banks, and it's even harder when one has to comply with various COVID-19 guidelines to prevent overcrowding. Secondly, each scheme has its own unique documentation requirements. For example, PM Ujjwala and PDS require the Aadhaar card to be linked to the beneficiary's bank account. MNREGA documents need to be validated at the local panchayat, and some schemes require BPL verification as well. And in a country where documentation is a fairly new practice, this can lead to a lot of people being excluded from these schemes. In our report, we also go into more detail about how the banking infrastructure is not extensive enough to ensure that these cash transfers are done on time without any inclusion or exclusion errors. We also discussed Indus Action's own report about the Jandan cash transfers to women, where we interviewed women who had the Jandan account, but we found that many of them hadn't received the money. One of the big bright spots here is the public distribution system, the PDS, which works through the network of ration shops throughout the country. According to research by Dvara, 87% of low-income households are covered by the scheme. And during the pandemic, 91% of these households received ration. Now, for the other schemes, only about 40% of those who are enrolled receive the benefits. This supports what economists such as Jean Jess have written about the efficacy of in-kind transfers as compared to cash transfers. So this brings us to the next section of the report, where Andres will talk about cash transfer programs and provide comparisons with Latin America. Thank you, and over to you, Andres.
Thank you so much, Pragnya and Madhuri. Good morning and a big namaste to everyone. I'm Andres Fortunato from Argentina, and last summer here in the US, where I'm studying a Master of Public Policy, I interned at the Indus Action, and it was a wonderful experience. I'm going to share basically an idea I encountered while researching and for the Bright Spots report and writing about it. That is basically has to do with how the discussion about social welfare is framed in India, and how can we think points of comparison with the experience in Latin America. So broadly speaking, this is nothing new. Of course, it's something we've encountered in different, many papers and very interesting research being done on, say, social safety nets in India. But there is a challenge in the integration of the different programs that are many, and even when, of course, there are some bright spots, there are also challenges for the implementation and delivery due to this main problem of the integration. So summarizing the key factors of this situation are the political economy of India, that is how the political actors shape the institutions and what are the rules of the game. When I say actors, I mean the states, the municipalities, the government, and the different actors involved in the delivery. Second, there are so many evaluations, there's so much research done or already done and being done. This can be a big tool for advocacy in terms of showing what works, taking a brief idea from poor economics, using those micro evaluations or that research to advance towards solving those problems is a key factor of the process. And then, of course, the institutional organization, where we can find the point of comparison historically being done, especially with Mexico and Brazil, due to the size of this of the countries that can be, related to India. And then, I can't pass the. Tanya, would you? Thank you so much. Not gonna talk too much about it. You can find more details in the report. Basically, the case of the Bolsa Familia in Brazil is very interesting for the Indian context due to the organizational structure. As you know, Brazil is a big country and very diverse. And when we talk about the integration of the Bolsa Familia, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but a collaboration between different actors involved in the process and the delivery. Municipalities, the national ministries, the states, researchers, universities, and of course the banks and registry that people need to be in order to receive the benefits. And then after this, thank you so much. This is already happening in India, and it's amazing how even when realities are so different, we can think of commonalities or a common ground for regions that speak different languages and have different history, like Latin America and South Asia. In that sense, that was like very interesting for me to experience during my research and my work at Indus Action. It's already happening with the direct benefit transfer systems, as you know, and JAM. But there's still, well, the things we encountered in our research, there's still some things to be done, some challenges to be addressed. That has to do with, of course, the decentralization, the simplification of the process, and technology. That is the integration of databases to combine the health, education, and poverty alleviation issues and approaches as set by Indus Action in the power hypothesis. So all this to say that the many discussions around social safety net, whether UBI, universal basic income, cash transfer should be conditional or not, all those discussions, at least to me, and what I found in the interesting research being done about it, has to start from the point of how to integrate the different programs. That's the point of, or the starting point for any discussion about this important and challenging issue in India. In my humble opinion, thank you so much for letting me participate in this report. And I hope to get a feedback from the readers.
Thank you so much for that, Andres. Hello, everybody. My name is Devin Hawes. I'm also a student at the University of Chicago. And I also had the pleasure and wonderful opportunity of getting to intern at Indus Action last summer. And I want to just first thank everybody at Indus Action, and especially the other co-authors and contributors for helping with this incredible report. So, sorry, Pragya, could you go to the next slide, please? All right, sorry, running out of time a little bit here, so I'll move as fast as possible. I'm going to focus just really briefly on two main ideas in the report that I had helped work with specifically, and one is helping vulnerable families mitigate the effects of shocks like a pandemic. So oftentimes in conversations about development, the poorest people are focused on, and they clearly should be a focus. But in India, half of families are just above the cusp of poverty and are in danger of slipping back into it. And shocks like a pandemic can cause that to happen. And one of the ways to ensure that families have some reserves that they can work with is by trying to increase household savings, access to formal financial institutions, and insurance, which all of these help families weather shocks like a pandemic with minimized detriment. And especially with PMGKY, access to formal financial institutions is very important because the DBT system of actually handing out benefits goes through formal financial institutions like banks. And oftentimes, unfortunately, it is poor rural and female workers in the informal economy which have the least access to these formal financial institutions, which can cause them to rely on less reliable mechanisms of getting money. Pragya, could you move to the next slide, please? Here, this is a nice graphic for Brookings. We can just kind of see the spectrum. And so the goal is helping people that are relying on money lenders, traders, friends and family, as shown on the left of the screen, move towards the right side of the screen. Next slide, please. Sorry, just trying to get through this as fast as possible. So there are many causes of financial exclusion, unfortunately, specifically geographic and social exclusion, which can come in a variety of forms. But luckily, we're seeing some great movement on these fronts. So for example, we see that with the PMJDY, there are lots of acronyms I'm working on remembering all, sorry. In 2014, only 53% of Indian adults had bank accounts, which is well below the global average, the global level of 64%. But PMJDY's incredible push for bank accounts increased this rate to 80% by 2017, which is fantastic. And we've also seen some recent randomized control trials in rural Chhattisgarh, which are also seeing that depositing weekly payments into an account at the village bank rather than paying in cash has resulted in the savings in the account increasing by 131% in 3 months. Then in addition to this, insurance can be very helpful, health insurance specifically like PMJAY, and also insurance on physical assets, because many times savings take the form of physical assets rather than only financial, can also help families get through these shocks. Then super fast, next slide, I can do it in like 30 seconds. Great. Then another key thing is ensuring that Indians actually are able to get enrolled in the schemes that they're eligible for, because designing a scheme and implementing it so that its intended recipients are enrolled in it are two different things. As of now, only 40% of Indian citizens actually apply for the goods and services they report needing from the government, which is a big issue. Information campaigns are one thing that can help with that. Indus Action recommends always using the local language in information campaigns, but experimentation has found that more effective than information alone is also some form of mediation, which actively helps people find and apply to programs that they're eligible for. So Aftershock is one example. It's a technology company that helps users match their profiles with schemes that they're eligible for, and then also direct them to where they need to go to apply and so on, using that model in the future. And finally, nationwide integration and standardization of documentation is also needed. Things like the One Nation, One Ration card system is a huge bright spot in that area. So thank you so much, everybody. And now I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Devin. So one of the main recommendations that we have from this particular section and from the entire report as well, one of them is a second version of PMGKY Plus, which looks at certain bright spots from within the PMGKY system already, and then seeing how we can enhance them or make some of those better. So there's more on that in the report, along with other recommendations as well. Great, we'll move to the next section of the presentation, which is talking, which includes all of our partner organizations. The way we framed this is that each organization will present their key insights or key findings that they've seen over the past year and on social protection in general, and then key recommendations that they have for the way moving forward. So we're trying to see how we can take this collaboration and make it more fruitful in the future. So, and for that first, and we're going in alphabetical order. So I'd invite from Aajeevika Bureau, Santosh Punya ji. Santosh ji, are you there? Just a second.
Hello.
Yes, Santoshi, can you turn your video on? So I will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you able
Yeah,
to see?
I can see you. I can see you.
Okay.
Right. So I'll just give a brief of Aajeevika Bureau. It is a non-profit organization working to enhance the dignity and well-being of migrant worker communities in the informal economy. It primarily works across the Western Indian migration corridor of Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. Santosh ji, welcome. आप in 5 minutes, if you can present आपके key findings पिछले साल के क्या रहे and key recommendations क्या हैं moving forward.
Definitely. Thank you, Madhuri, and congratulations for launch the big report. बेसिकली जैसे आपने बताया, आजीविका ब्यूरो राजस्थान और गुजरात में, बेसिकली महाराष्ट्र में माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स के साथ काम करता है, और सबसे ज़्यादा सफ़र करने वाली अगर कम्युनिटी थी ड्यूरिंग द लॉकडाउन तो वो माइग्रेंट वर्कर्स थे. एक तो ये है कि उससे पूरी 2-3 चीज़ें अगर मैं कहूँ तो विजिबिलिटी जो थी ना इस पूरे इश्यू की, वो सब लोगों को समझ में आई. अदरवाइज उससे पहले बहुत बड़ा हमारे पास कोई डेटाबेस नहीं था, कोई नंबर्स नहीं थे, एंड गवर्नमेंट हैव नो आइडिया कि ये कितना बड़ा वर्ग होगा. और उसी वजह से जो पूरा जो मैच हुआ उसका कारण भी यही था कि हमारे पास शहरों में उस तरह की बेसिकली उस तरह की प्रिपरेशंस नहीं थी कि लोगों को अगर रोक के रखना है तो उनके लिए सिस्टम्स क्या होंगे, उनके लिए अरेंजमेंट्स क्या होंगे, क्या हमारे पास ऐसा इतना इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है कि हम करोड़ों करोड़ लोगों को ऐसे रोक सकते हैं जहाँ पे उनके लिए किसी भी तरह की कोई सिस्टम या इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर नहीं है, सप्लाईज नहीं है. तो लोग इस तरह से बुरी तरह से फंस गए थे. तो 2-3 चीजें, जैसे मैं अगर मैं लर्निंग के उसमें कहूँ, 2-3 चीज पॉइंट में करना चाहूंगा. एक तो ये था कि इतना बड़ा जो स्टेप था वो विदाउट एनी प्रिपरेशन, विदाउट एनी थिंक अबाउट कि क्या होगा इतने लोगों का, उस तरह से ले लिया गया था. और एक मशीन की तरह कि कोई ऑर्डर कर रहा है और उसको मान लिया जाए, मतलब उसमें कोई ह्यूमन एंगल को एनालाइज नहीं किया गया था. किसी भी तरह की जो क्लैशेज हो सकते थे उनको एनालाइज नहीं किया गया था. तो एक तो सबसे बड़ी चीज यही रही कि अगर आप कोई इतना बड़ा फैसला ले रहे हो जो बहुत सारे लोगों को इम्पेक्ट कर रहा है, तो उसमें उसके प्रो एंड कॉन्स को अच्छी तरीके से हमें करना चाहिए. दूसरी चीज ये थी कि जैसे बहुत पुलिस को मतलब इसको जो पूरी मैनेज करने के लिए पुलिस के हाथ में पूरा काम था, और हमारी पुलिस पूरी तरह से मतलब इसको मैनेज करने में विफल रही, और उसका जो खामियाजा है वो लोगों को झेलना पड़ा. मार खा के, तरह तरह से प्रताड़ित होके. कई लोगों से हम बात करते हैं और वो ये कहते हैं कि अगर हम कोई जुर्म करते ना तो शायद उतनी मार हमें नहीं पड़ती, सिर्फ हम घर लौट रहे थे, हमारा जुर्म क्या था, ठीक है, या हम जब जरूरत थी या भूखे थे तो हम सिर्फ रोड पे आ गए थे कि कुछ सामान लेके आना है. और उसमें जिस तरह से हमारे साथ जो व्यवहार हुआ है, जैसे हम कोई आतंकवादी हो या हम किसी दूसरे देश के नागरिक हो, हमने कोई बॉर्डर क्रॉस कर लिया हो, उस तरह का व्यवहार हमारे साथ किया जा रहा था. स्पेशली जो स्टेट बॉर्डर्स थे जहाँ पे क्रॉस करना था, वहाँ तो बड़ा ही मुश्किल हो गया था. लोग जंगलों में चल चल के और इस तरह से ऐसे आ रहे थे अपने आप को बचा बचा के. तीसरी चीज ये है कि मतलब लर्निंग में अगर मैं कहूँ तो जो नरेगा है, नरेगा को अगर सही से मैनेज किया जाए तो जो जो डिस्ट्रेस माइग्रेशन है उसको काफी हद तक मैनेज किया जा सकता है. माइग्रेशन नहीं रुकेगा बिकॉज नरेगा उसका सब्स्टिट्यूट नहीं है, पर शायद वो डिस्ट्रेस में नहीं होगा. और उसमें और नरेगा के साथ साथ थोड़े से और रूरल लाइवलीहुड पे जोड़ देने की बात है. सिर्फ नरेगा अपने आप में वो नहीं है, एग्रीकल्चर की जो पोटेंशियल है उसको टैप करने की जरूरत है. और जो दूसरे जो लोकल इश्यूज हैं और या जो लाइवलीहुड के जो ऑप्शंस हैं उनको अगर सही से हम टैप करें तो काफी डिस्ट्रेस को हम रोक सकते हैं. माइग्रेशन पे चॉइस के बेसिस पे होगा, जो थोड़ा सा बेटर कंडीशन पे होगा. तो जो ये मैं अगर 3 की लर्निंग्स कहूँ तो ये है. रिकमेंडेशंस की अगर मैं बात करूँ, टाइम ज्यादा नहीं है और मैं सीधा पॉइंट पे आना चाहता हूँ. रिकमेंडेशन की बात करूँ तो सबसे पहली चीज ये है कि हमें एक अच्छा डेटाबेस क्रिएट करने की जरूरत है जो माइग्रेंट वर्कर और उनके मूवमेंट के बारे में देश को बेहतर तरीके से प्लानिंग करने के लिए हेल्प कर सके. और ये स्टार्ट एमर्ज होना चाहिए फ्रॉम पंचायत लेवल इन रूरल एरिया और फ्रॉम अर्बन एरिया जो बार्ड लेवल है वहां से लेके ये डिस्ट्रिक्ट, स्टेट एंड सेंटर तक एक सेंट्रलाइज डेटाबेस बने जिसमें हमें प्लान कर सकें. अगर पूरा आपने देखा होगा पूरा ट्रांसपोर्टेशन का प्लान में सरकार को कोई आइडिया ही नहीं था कहाँ से कितने ट्रेन चाहिए, कहाँ से कितनी बस चाहिए, क्योंकि वो नंबर ही हमारे पास नहीं था, उसका कोई आइडिया नहीं था. तो पहली चीज तो यही है कि डेटाबेस अच्छा सा हो. दूसरा है अर्बन प्लानिंग जब होती है तो माइग्रेंट वर्कर को उसमें काउंट किया जाना चाहिए, जिससे आप शहरों में उनके लिए इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में कोई स्पेस क्रिएट कर सको, उनको जो सिटीजनशिप या जो बेसिक इम्यूनिटीज हैं वो प्रोवाइड करा सको. अभी जिस तरह की अभी आपने सूरत की घटना देखी थी, थोड़े दिन पहले सूरत में एक बड़ा एक्सीडेंट हुआ, रोड पे सो रहे थे, और उसका कारण ये था कि लगातार जो अर्बन अथॉरिटीज हैं वो एविक्शन करती रहती हैं, लोग अपने घर नहीं बना पाते हैं, या जो छोटा कच्चा घर है वो नहीं बना पाते हैं, जो किराया घर है वो अफोर्ड नहीं कर पाते हैं. थोड़ी हाउसिंग पॉलिसी और अर्बन प्लानिंग जो भी है उनमें अच्छी बेहतर व्यवस्था होनी चाहिए इन चीजों की. थर्ड इज जो बहुत बड़ा जैसे हमारा लेबर लाइन से जो एक्सपीरियंस है वो ये है कि अगर आप जब तक कोई बेज मीडिएशन का या बेज डिस्प्यूट में किसी भी तरह का लीगल एड और मीडिएशन का अगर कोई सिस्टम प्रोवाइड नहीं कराएंगे, तो ये लोग जो ऑलरेडी वनरेबल हैं वो अपने राइट्स को ऐसे ही छोड़ते रहेंगे। और जो जिस पर्पज के लिए, जिस प्राइमरी पर्पज के लिए वो माइग्रेट करते हैं कि उसके हाथ में कुछ इनकम आए और जिससे वो अपने लाइवलीहुड को चला सके, वही पर्पज वो मीट नहीं कर पाते हैं। ये 3 मेजर रिकमेंडेशंस मेरी ओर से हैं। थैंक यू।
Thank you so much, Santosh. End में हम Q&A का टाइम रखेंगे, so if anyone
sir.
has any questions, they can.
Yeah, I will.
ask
Yeah.
it. Thank you. So next, we'll have Dvara Research, and I'm just going to.
And James who recovered instantaneously.
Nishant.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, we can hear you, Nishant. If you could turn the video on, then I can.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I don't know why it's not. Just give me a second. Maybe it's something to do
No.
also, but
No.
it'll.
We can see you, Nishant. We can
Oh,
see you,
okay,
we can
cool.
see you. It's good.
Great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay.
I'll just give a quick introduction.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Of Dvara. So Dvara is a policy research institution based in India, and their mission is to ensure that every individual and every enterprise has complete access to financial services. They strongly believe in the deeply transformative power of finance in unlocking the potential of individuals, households, enterprises, and local governments. So great, Nishant.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you, Madhuri. Thank you for inviting me over and also having us over to contribute to this beautiful report. I'm learning more about it as I'm reading other sections as well that have come in. And thank you so much to the other authors and for everybody else to be here. So Madhuri has been very strict with us, so I'm going to keep it very short. So just to give you guys a quick overview about Dvara, my name is Nishant and I work at Dvara Research. I specifically lead a team called the Social Protection Initiative. We kind of since about 2018, and we've been working on issues that relate to kind of how do we universalize social security in India. I think everybody here who's been here, studied India, knows the kind of size of the informal sector and the kind of vulnerability that families who are right now employed in the informal sector are kind of exposed due to the fragility of kind of not having any sort of income security, the lack of any sort of risk protection schemes in the form of insurance or pensions, or just wage stability. Because of the lack of any formal kind of employment contract. We're also thinking about kind of mitigating this problem, not by entirely formalizing the kind of the employment, the workforce of India, but thinking about how do we build markets that can provide both from the public but also from the private sector to build markets to provide risk protection for kind of these families and informal sector workers. Most recently, we've been working around issues of last mile delivery, and I'll stick to kind of discussing just a kind of insight and a recommendation only from that. So I'm going to only talk about one particular issue that I've discussed I've discussed a few things in the chapter that we've contributed to, and would love your thoughts and feedback on the rest. But just for the purposes of this and keeping it short and focused on one particular issue, I'm going to discuss about one particular problem that we felt while studying last mile delivery. We've been studying it for a while, and we've developed this kind of framework to understand exclusion that's occurring through kind of social protection schemes. Particularly, we've been studying this work from 2018 onwards, but obviously we got more insight and more information on this through the pandemic because of the various sources, the various wonderful studies conducted by people on this panel as well, or contributors to this report as well, but from other sources as well. We've been learning more and more about where our social protection system, especially in terms of delivery, has had problems. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but what we've essentially done is try to understand from different kind of experiences that we've seen both from secondary as well as primary research, where are the issues, or where are people falling off in terms of from the delivery chain when it comes to welfare payments specifically, and we've done the same for multiple other schemes like PDS and MNREG, but kind of focused on understanding where the cracks lie in a DBT system. Because as you know, India is moving towards a very um, um, cash-focused welfare system, which has its own merits and demerits. I'm not going into discussing any of that, but just to think about, if we were to identify the gaps and if we were to classify the problems into different parts, parts basically marked out by different stakeholders that might be from the government side or from the private sector side, who might be responsible for each stage, what are the kind of issues are we seeing and where are they prevalent in different forms. And we've been studying this through like large scale surveys, kind of different things, but I think none of it made more sense for us than kind of a couple of very insightful qualitative studies that came out through the pandemic. So I'm going to lead to talk about just one issue. Some of you might have seen this already, but I'm going to just try to highlight the issue that I'm talking about purely from the sense of a story. We found this farmer who we had got in touch with through Gramvani, another collaborator of ours who I'd talk about a little bit later, but kind of through their IVR system, there was a complaint thrown in and it was flagged, and we kind of got this story of this farmer who's been trying to get his PM Kisan payment, which is the kind of cash transfer for farmers, specifically dedicated payments, and has been trying to get that payment for about 2 years almost now, touching February. And the entire issue is masked with the problem not of any particular fraud or anything, but just a lack of adequate information being provided to the farmer. The farmer had gone to different stages of nodal offices that are responsible for kind of directing this payment to his bank account. But at each stage, there was an issue which the officials at that nodal office themselves were not completely aware of what the issue was. And each different time, there was a redundancy in the processes being elucidated to the farmer, and which led to him carrying out the same thing over and over again, which is just resubmitting his documents to try and get a resolution to this problem of just trying to figuring out why why the benefits that he was deemed eligible for were not being kind of put in. Through kind of other CSO networks, civil society organizations, we tried to dive into this case, and we found out that the issue was something related to the state level PFMS, but the larger problem which kind of which kind of blew up in our face was the fact that this particular person and the different kind of same kind of issues that we've seen in different cases was this kind of lack of any grievance redressal system. There was no one focal point where a farmer for chasing PM Kisan payments or any kind of old age pension schemes or any welfare system that's been transformed into a DBT system. There is a kind of overall juxtaposition of complexity around how to avail this payment. Most of the times, and because of the system being renovated so beautifully, most of the time it works seamlessly and people get the money in their accounts and get notified. But in the instance of the rare exclusionary problem, there are problems where people are unable to completely figure out where the problem lies in their application. Some of these have been digitized to have portals to show them the current status of their application, but none of these seem super accessible to the beneficiary, and at the end of the day, they require some sort of assisted help, sort of assisted services, which you could argue was why the CSC architecture was set up in India. These sort of providing these assistance architecture for people who are unable to get these benefits or navigate the system in order to get these benefits. But clearly there is a vacuum here. There's a vacuum where people are not able to kind of register complaints or grievances quite literally. And I'm sure the other participants as well as some by Pragya and the team here had shown kind of different issues of why people were being excluded. We might kind of understand them, do research to understand these categories of exclusion better. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to see is that there is no kind of one-stop shop for people, accessible shop for people to kind of voice their concerns or exclusion. So that's the kind of only insight we have, and the kind of recommendation I would come to is kind of building a grievance redressal system. And just go a little forward. What we meant by building a grievance redressal system is not that it's not that none of the states or the center-enabled grievance redressal systems don't exist. They do exist in some of them quite well, but they're not quite inclusive enough for with the purpose of accessing or aggregating complaints. You see, the density of complaints in most of these nodal offices are really small, purely because the complaints are either meant to be written out or submitted in physical form or in some online portal, both of which due to different circumstances turn out to be inaccessible. There are issues where the the problems itself are a very centralized problem and nothing to do with the block level official or the panchayat level patwari who's might be responsible at this stage. They might not, the issue at hand might be out of their control and thus kind of not really know what to do in terms of, and not really cannot do anything apart from escalate the issue to a centralized office, possibly in the state capital or in Delhi. And neither is there incentive for aggregating and showcasing the kind of complaints that are coming in local offices. They're deemed to be something of a black mark on the service architecture provided, instead of kind of being transparent enough to show these are problems faced by people in your area and you could also be facing these problems, and thus this is a solution for you to navigate in. So our kind of larger case recommendation is just trying to fix, we can kind of build all the welfare schemes we want, but without having the feedback loop of creating a good grievance redressal, forget a grievance redressal mechanism which comes later, but just creating an architecture to capturing grievances and actually understanding at the local unit level, not at a state or a center level, which is more like a transparency tool or a showcase number, but rather think about this as aggregating something at the unit level, complaints, which can directly fall into a feedback loop of trying to solve for that particular issue in the local government, and also can act as a good stamp of transparency and accountability in that area. We've kind of built this system through an IVR platform using Gramvani, as I said, our collaborators, to kind of make it easy for people to just leave a missed call and kind of create a system where you could where we would call you back, register complaints through a voice message and nothing to do, follow up, and then help the consumer redress some complaints. This was not a scalable model because it was kind of very small, but we kind of realized that there needs to be in-depth action and activity that goes on into handling each of these grievances and at the stakeholder level. And it can kind of really enhance the level of efficiency that our welfare system can have, as and when we're trying to scale with PMGKY plus, etc. The idea that we are lacking a feedback loop is what kind of, I believe, is the biggest recommendation or learning for us through the pandemic and just before as well. I'd like to stop there and happy to give you more information. I've explained this more in the chapter, in the report, but would love to, talk you through more if there is more time at the end. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nishant. Thank you. And yeah, but as in when we have time later, we will, if we have time for a Q&A, or otherwise we'll send across email IDs so people can interact post this.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. We'll now move to Dalberg, and I'll give a quick intro for Dalberg, and we have Shweta with us from Dalberg. Hi, Shweta. So Dalberg is an impact advisory group that combines strategy consulting, design thinking, data analytics, and research to address complex social, economic, and environmental challenges. They work with communities, institutions, governments, and corporations to develop solutions that create impact at scale. With over 30 locations, Dalberg is driven by a mission to build a world where all people everywhere can reach their full potential. Welcome, Shweta. I'll just share my screen.
Perfect. And thank you so much for doing screen share for me, Madhuri. And thank you for having me. And huge congratulations to you, Darren, and the rest of the Indus Action team on the Bright Spots report, and for inviting us to contribute. So just a little bit of context about what Dalberg has been doing. Over the last couple of years, we've been working on a range of social protection issues. And when the pandemic hit, we launched a series of studies that were looking at the impact of COVID on low-income populations in particular, and the role of social protection programs, including PMGKY, on supporting them through the crisis. So what I'll talk through today is primarily based on some work that we did around specifically PMGKY and the government entitlements in March, April, May of last year. I'll also reference a little bit of some of the emerging findings from some of the other work that we've done, particularly looking at the gendered impact of the crisis. So in March to April, May, what we did was we actually conducted a study of about 47,000 low-income households to understand, what was the impact of the crisis on their families? Were they getting government support? Was it helping them? Was it adequate? And I think from that work, there were 3 big takeaways. And if you don't mind flipping to the next slide, I'll start with the first. The first was that the coverage of entitlements was quite high, actually, but an important minority remains left out, especially in urban India. And so what you'll see is for each of the takeaways, we felt there were some bright spots and areas for improvement. I think overwhelmingly, and this came through both in our study, but also other studies, was that PDS actually worked really well, right? You saw over 90% of families, both in urban and rural areas, low-income families say that they were covered by the program. And actually you saw people who were not covered by the family still able to receive and avail of PDS benefits through the crisis. And so, at a time when, people had really lost 60, 70, 80% of their income, PDS really, really came through. And I think when we saw the government extension of the PDS rations through November, it was really welcome, just given the time that it was taking for the country to recover. Cash schemes, on the whole, and we looked at several different cash schemes. We looked at 4, PM Kisan, Jan Dhan, Ujjwala, and I'm forgetting the other one, PM Kisan, Ujjwala, Jan Dhan, and social pensions. And what we saw when we looked at them as a group was that over 90% of rural households actually had access to at least one, and about 74% of urban families had access to at least one, right? So if you look at cash transfers as a whole, not terrible coverage, and especially in rural areas. But at the same time, there were still about 1% of rural families and about 4% of urban families who are not registered for any scheme, whether PDS or cash scheme. So that was a few million people who are low income, right, who were completely left out of any of the safety nets that we had studied, which were the major safety nets. And when you looked at the cash schemes, there were quite a lot of rural families who were left out. Second takeaway for us was that the speed of the delivery of the transfers actually was quite impressive in India, but it wasn't universal, right? So if I think about what happened between April and May, which is when we conducted our study, and we got data essentially every week, what you saw was a huge improvement, especially in PDS, where in April you had about 50 or so percent of families actually say that they'd received their grains. By May, over 90% of families had received their grains, right? So it went up really significantly. It was a similar but not quite as strong picture for pulses. There was a lot of reporting, I think, during the pandemic of, the dal pulses were just not, reaching people. And about 10%. What we saw was that, about by April, about 50% of families actually had received pulses. And that was really driven by state level variation. So some good news, some bad news there. And if you flip to the next slide, what you see in terms of the cash transfers was that, by May, about 80% of households actually had received at least one of their cash transfers. So good, but areas for improvement still. And if we move to the next slide, we can talk about the third takeaway, which for me was really that the government entitlements were really helpful. Most families actually said that it made a big difference to their lives, right? But I think that what we saw then, and I think we continue to see now through some of our emerging data, there are a lot of people who continue to need support. And so one of the things that we're starting to see is that as of November, most but not all income earners, right, about 5% of women and about 10% of men who were earning before, they actually have not recovered their employment yet. And still, monthly earnings remain about 20 to 30% below pre-pandemic levels, right? So people are still suffering, and the need for entitlements, I think, remains. And, PMGKY has largely ended, but I think there's some important opportunities that we have to support, families who have not yet recovered. And so with that, I'll move to the recommendations. And I think there's 3 that I wanted to highlight here today. One is to consider the opportunities for fresh enrollments, and especially in urban areas. We talked about the data that shows that, urban resilience was just not as strong as rural resilience. There's a lot of discourse around, is there a time for an urban Manrega right now, et cetera. Obviously, you're seeing from the data that, there's just not as many people who are registered for various cash transfers in urban areas as well. So I think an important opportunity to consider that aspect. The second, and we talked about this in a prior op-ed as well, is it's a good time to really think about should we be making social welfare universal, especially and at least in times of crisis? And I think our prevailing perspective is that, look, you can sunset out after crises are over, and we're still not out of the crisis right now. So if someone's coming to the PDS shop saying, I need PDS, probably better off giving it to them. And we can have opt-out provisions for those who don't need it. And I think that you'll see kind of in the human behavior that people who don't need it won't actually go and ask for the additional support. I think the third is, I think we have an opportunity to embed greater gender intentionality in our social protection programs. One of the things that we saw is that, women's access to their essential supplies, menstrual supplies, contraceptives were significantly dampened during the crisis. And, those are the things that actually just get lopped off when you have no money, right? Even for food. And so I think there's an opportunity to think about how can we integrate some of those essentials as part of our government delivery and response in, major announcements like PMGKY. And similarly, when we think about the recovery and kind of, where we are in the crisis right now, I think we still have an opportunity to think about how do we extend and ensure the delivery of cash transfers to groups that are disproportionately left out and affected, like domestic workers. Well, some of the data that we're starting to see is that, they haven't actually been able to come back to work, but they're not really covered by any of the specific transfer schemes like PM Kisan or, some of the other schemes like the construction worker schemes that are specifically targeted, at specific employment segments. So broader opportunity, these are just examples, but broader opportunity to think about how do we embed greater intentionality in our government and social protection schemes. So with that, I'll end and pass it to the next person. Madhuri, thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Shweta, and thank you for keeping it well within time. Thanks a lot. I think very important recommendations to look through, and we will get back on like a common platform again with discussing some of these. Great. So as we move on, we have with us Tanya from EPoD. I'll give a quick introduction of EPoD. EPoD India is part of the IFMR Society with strategic oversight from Kriya University. It is a research initiative that uses data-driven analysis to promote inclusive economies and societies. They're set apart by a focus on how policy can promote inclusion using a variety of data sources and rigorous methodological approaches in the context of sustained policy engagement, while shaping the public discourse on issues of governance, gender, and the environment. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Madhuri. I'll just start sharing my screen.
Yes.
Chat. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak about some of the work we've done. And thank you so much to all of the other speakers for your amazing points. So a little bit about me. I'm Tanya. I'm a senior research associate at EPoD India, and I work primarily on our studies in Chhattisgarh. And today I want to talk about some of our findings from some surveys we've done of migrants who returned home during after the lockdown. And while I don't have formal recommendations, I do want to highlight some things that provided much needed support to migrants during this time, and also some potential for the government to respond going forward. So a little bit about what we did. We conducted phone surveys of migrants who were coming back from large urban centers to their home states, and we did this in multiple states. These surveys focused on understanding their immediate access to government benefits, food security. So we asked questions like whether they were worried about food, whether they were skipping meals, whether they were eating less, and also what they were sort of thinking of in terms of their work for the future. And we did this twice. Once we did this shortly after the lockdown was announced, May, June. And then we did a follow-up exercise in July, August to kind of look at more medium-term well-being. And so something we did to understand access to government benefits was we had a list of government benefits, and we asked each migrant if they had received it or if someone else in their family had received it. And what we found was that this really varied across government programs, but in both states, we found that PDS was the one that people reported receiving most frequently. In Chhattisgarh, for instance, 85% of our respondents reported that they'd received PDS rations in the past 30 days. And this was not only about receiving the benefit, but we also found that people who had received it were much less likely to report that they were worried about food or they were worried about running out of it. And there's also potential spillover effects that we found in a separate study where we found that places that had received chana had lower private sector prices for chana. So we can also there's evidence to suggest that providing rations also sort of helped control conditions in the private market. And so in July, when we followed up, we spoke a little bit to them about their work and whether they were working, and this ended up varying across states. So while employment was fairly high in Chhattisgarh, where 73% of our respondents reported doing some kind of work, something that we found was common was that a majority of respondents who were working in agriculture, which is not very surprising considering it was peak agricultural season. And this also may have played a role in their decision to return back home. But like everything said, this was something that provided support to them during this time. So we feel that it is important to highlight. And another thing we found was that despite everything and despite facing all of these challenges, their sentiment about returning to work was extremely positive. So this is shortly after the lockdown, and a majority of our migrants reported being interested in returning, like moving outside again, like going back out, migrating again for work. And when we asked them if they'd be willing to take up work in their panchayats, if it was offered to them, like staggering over 98% of people said yes. So which sort of leads my co-authors and I to believe that like this really is an area where governments could spur employments in various locations, including smaller urban centers in these states which are generally known for out-migration. So on that note, I'd like to conclude, and also once again, thank you so much for inviting us to speak about our work.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Yes, I will now invite, last but not the least, our next partner is UNDP. And UNDP works in about 170 countries and territories to eradicate poverty while protecting the planet. They help countries develop strong policies, skills, and partnerships so that they can sustain their progress. UNDP has been working in India since 1951 in almost all areas of human development, from systems and institutional strengthening to inclusive growth and sustainable livelihoods, as well as sustainable energy, environment, and resilience. Great. Ravi from UNDP. Oh, okay. Sorry.
So thank you, Madhuri, for such a nice introduction for the UNDP. So like a lot of speakers talk about the data and the analysis, I'm not going to talk about data analysis. I'm talking about a case study that on the project that we did with government of UP, that is skill mapping app for the returning migrants. So just sharing the screen. Please excuse me for the background noise actually. So during the lockdown and the pandemic, UNDP partnered with Office of Relief Commissioner, Department of Revenue, Government of Uttar Pradesh to develop a Pravasi Rahat Mitra app with the purpose of to collect the data of their skills so that they can be supported in getting jobs and livelihood opportunity in Uttar Pradesh themselves. So that was the idea. This screen shows the landing page. So basically, we worked with the Office of Relief Commissioner and created a massive data collection exercise, the whole system, and then the data of around 3.7 million migrants were collected, including the basic skills, details, bank account numbers, etc. And it is one of the largest sub-national exercise in the India. And this data basically was collected with a lot of system strengthening because there are a lot of views with industry department, MSME, with skills, and a lot of departments came together to collect the insights and the requirement for the data, why to collect data, how to collect the data, and then how we can integrate it later. And that integration will happen like once the data was collected, this data was shared with the health department, this data was shared with labor and employment, the data was shared with the agriculture, rural development. So all the data that was collected with the system, around 4 million data with geographic disaggregated data, with sex-wise disaggregated data. So all those data were shared with the department. So the basic idea is that there is a lot of capacity building exercises that we need to do with the government because the overall system was stressed. So how do we do it? So we basically try to integrate the process through the digital system, and we use Zoom extensively to train the people in the system from Patwari, Lekpal upward to the SDM level officers to how to collect the data, how to use the data, and how to send it. And this data was then utilized to transfer across system using APIs. So a lot of integration and lot of API related issues were also like resolved during the process. So it was a 3-month exercise that took lot of effort of the system, lot of department, and a lot of bandwidth of the government was used to use this data, and this data is now being utilized to provide employment to the migrants within the UP. It is one of the successful exercises which like basically highlights the government effort to provide employment to the most marginalized section of the population. While lot of studies like beforehand have mentioned on the cash in cash out system, but before that also there is need of lot of strengthening of government systems where the civil society can play greater role so that the impact is manifold and multiplied, and definitely like it can change life. So the idea, the thought that I'm going to leave behind is that we need to work on the data, technology and policy like as a like overlapping area, and the idea is that how do we strengthen the state capability in using and data and technology for strengthening the policy and creating policies which benefits to the masses. So that what it came together in like Office of Relief Commissioner effort in government of UP and used further. So idea is that how do we build it further and how do we work further and further to strengthen this system. So thank you. I will stop here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ravi. And thank you for those recommendations. Are very important. We've seen the work that happened with the UP government as well. So we'll take up further discussions in the Q&A section if there are any questions on this from the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll now move on to the next section of this discussion, which is a panel discussion around convergence for social security and welfare. The reason we decided to talk about this is that while we are we're looking at what has happened in the past year and understanding the situation that has been along with certain recommendations, it's extremely important to also now understand what is the best way moving forward and how can we look at social security in a more holistic manner rather than looking at it in isolation. And that is where we'll be talking to a group, to a panel today. And I'll introduce the moderator, who is Ms. Shrayana Bhattacharya. She's an economist at with the World Bank. And Shrayana, over to you to introduce the panelists and to take this forward.
Thanks, Madhuri. I hope I'm visible and audible.
Yes, you are.
Well, firstly, congratulations to the team and thank you so much for inviting me. Let me just give a quick background on how I am connected to social protection. This is actually an area that I feel I've essentially worked 15 years of my career on, starting from working for movements such as Seva, then moving to the Delhi government and then now the World Bank. And one very fascinating and important shift that's occurred, I think, in the conversation and just listening to all of you is that 15 years ago or 10 years ago, when I was just a student and coming into work, social protection was often seen as just dole outs, right? These are political dole outs. These are schemes that are just being given out as largesse. Whereas increasingly, I think with the pandemic and also climate shocks and disasters that we've seen, so it's not just the pandemic, be it floods in Kerala, be it earthquakes, there is a growing sense that social protection and protecting people from shocks are strategic investments, not only in people's lives, but also the economy, because it essentially ensures that workers remain productive, people have access to jobs. So I think that's critical. Let me, if with your permission, Madhuri, is it okay if essentially I talk about one issue and then go to a specific person in the panel? Because I think that might be a more interactive way to go. Let me start by just reacting to something that I think has been a theme that's running through the conversation, which is how do we think about social protection in an aggregate form? And in India, and I'd actually like to start by introducing Dr. Shalini Rajneesh, who's ACS planning. Madhuri,
she wasn't able to join us today. She had a meeting that has come up and that's
okay.
I
think Mr. Menon's on right now, right? And is there anyone else from the government of Karnataka, Madhuri?
No,
because
we have Dr. Chaya with us.
Yeah. Okay.
And Dr. Menon's there.
So then maybe I'll just start with Dr. Menon. So let me switch gears. So one of the biggest challenges that at least seems to be coming up is that India has 390 benefit transfer schemes. This is as per the government of India's own list made by the DBT mission. You look at a state like Kerala, and Kerala itself, where I work and we're supporting the finance department there, they have 400 state schemes as well. One of the challenges going forward is, politically, it's obviously difficult to think of a world where you consolidate potentially schemes. And I know Chhattisgarh has a very interesting example, and Karnataka is working on something very exciting as well on thinking of consolidation. I'd be curious to hear from you, Dr. Menon. Number one, where do you think the fiscal space potentially lies? Because there's certainly now, coming out of the pandemic, there will be need for additional support. Right now, India spends around 2.5% of GDP on social protection. And it's across these 390 programs. There's a fair amount of overlapping and duplication when it comes to what the schemes are providing for. There's a lot of breadth and perhaps minimum depth. So perhaps your perspectives a little bit on how the system can move forward in a much more converged way, and then hearing also what the innovations in Chhattisgarh that are due. Thank you. And I think, no, Dr. Menon, you're muted, and I need to introduce you as well. You're the Labour Commissioner of the government of Chhattisgarh. For some reason, I feel everyone knows you, which I actually do think everyone does, but I'll still go. You're the Labour Commissioner for the government of Chhattisgarh. Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you. I hope you're not muted anymore.
Yeah. So at the outset, let me thank both Yana as well as Madhuri for blessing me with a doctorate degree. I'm yet to acquire a doctorate. I'm just, you can just call me Alex. All right. So, and I hope I'll acquire a doctorate sometime in my life. So, I mean, there's a very pointed question to ask about the fiscal space, that is available for social security benefits in the state. So currently I head the labor sector, and I can speak about the labor sector because that would add, give you a very detailed, in-depth understanding of one department rather than spreading it out to all departments. So if you look at the fiscal space available to the labor department, we have something called cess, BOC cess, Building Other Construction Workers cess, available to us, which currently is not in a great shape in terms of casting a wider net, in terms of casting the net in a proper fashion. Currently, I get around 170 odd crores per annum from the cess, but the collection mechanism is not up to the mark. There are a lot of loopholes, and the building construction cost, which has to be standardized, and people who have to, like for example, if there's a factory being constructed, the factory only pays me the cess for the factory premises and not for the compound wall. The site development work is left out, the plantation work is left out, and so on and so forth. So the cess itself is building and other construction works. Some of the other construction does not invite the cess in any of the cases. So there is an immediate need to revamp the whole cess collection mechanism, to go online, to make it simple and make it voluntary, but at the same time not to leave any loophole for the guys who have to pay the cess. Second is something called as we call in Hindi as Abhidhaya Rashi, the contribution amount that is being paid by every worker as well as by the employer to the labor welfare board. There are also a lot of loopholes. To give you some numbers, ESIC has a number, the Employee State Insurance Corporation has a number of around 7.2 lakhs, who are recognized as organized sector laborers in Chhattisgarh, but the approved number goes down to 5.2. I don't know what happens to those 2.6 odd lakh laborers who are left out, who are not recognized as organized laborers. How the gap arises. And when compared to this 5.2 recognized of the ESIC, the Labor Welfare Board, which is supposed to cater to the organized sector laborers, has a registered number of only 3.2. So another 2 lakh goes missing. So the contribution amount goes down. So there are a lot of loopholes in the system in which you're able to, and I think when it comes to social security, even this money would still not be enough. We were trying to see how we can design something on a priority basis, and we were struck with paying some kind of a death and disability allowance of ₹1 lakh, and at least giving a pension of around 5,000 rupees to the family for the next 5 years. And even that was eating into a chunk of around 70-80 crores of our budget. So, there is, with these two, and again, ESIC has a separate contribution from the employer as well as the employee, which is a huge quantum, which can actually take care of the health part completely, because I think ESIC sits for a huge quantum of money, and it's giving a per annum per beneficiary limit of around 3,000. which is a fairly decent amount for us to manage the health part. Now there is a convergence of the Ayushman Bharat as well as the ESIC scheme, I think, which is going to act in our favor, because we got a bigger pie to basically bargain with the private healthcare systems, and thereby improve the health coverage and the benefits under the health sector. But otherwise, post GST, the ability of the states to mobilize funds for themselves through any channel has become very, very limited. And over and above that, I mean, we have also changed the codes now. The BOC cess has now been exempted for all works below 50 lakh rupees. Already I don't know if any of the rural areas, any construction worker is paying a cess or not. Now this is, by exempting even more, we are actually making the space pretty small. We are actually, narrowing the space. So we have to get innovative to get funds for the social protection schemes of the labor sector. So the same thing would apply for the other sectors also.
Alex, actually, let me just come back to you with one, because one of the things that we are learning a lot in our work, because in the World Bank, and as you know this very well, Alex, we're supporting projects in different states, including Chhattisgarh, to create a consolidated, what we call a social registry. I think the recommendations of this report call an integrated database, right?
Yeah.
One of the challenges, I mean, in doing this is that while India is a pioneer when it comes to actually using technology, right? I mean, if it's the world of APIs and tech, India truly is a country that several other countries have so much to learn from. But take the example, in fact, EPoD itself had a fascinating study on Narega in Madhya Pradesh, where they basically found that while the tech system for payments might work well, the data entry operators and the human resources that are needed to actually be trained with the right talent, right, to tackle this technology, that doesn't exist. So one is the HR dimension of using technology to create these registries and databases. And the second, Alex, I just wanted you to reflect also on the fact that Chhattisgarh is trying to create this consolidated, from what I understand, essentially it will be a form of a registry, perhaps leveraging the NFSA, which is a huge data asset, a bright spot. But again, one of the challenges with that is, as we move forward, is if you look at other countries that have done this, they have institutional mechanisms. So Andre, for example, I think mentioned Brazil. Brazil actually has a presidential decree which essentially codes out how the data will be exchanged, the privacy frameworks, how do you protect the data, use the data. Do you think right now at the state level, I mean, you're hearing a lot of these recommendations in the report on creating integrated databases. Do you feel states are, in terms of human resources and institutions, what additionally needs to be done, in your opinion, to make this a reality? Because everyone's talking about it, creating a registry, creating a database. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a fairly good experience, in trying to create a social registry, a golden record, and then a trigger mechanism to basically, touch other databases, thereby automating beneficiary identification as well as benefit dispersal itself. We had a grand scheme called integrated proactive e-governance, which is funded by World Bank, which we started 2 years back. And which is happening, but pretty slowly. The whole idea behind the scheme was this, that currently the onus, I'll just first answer 2 questions which you asked and then go to the main topic. You asked me if technology was a problem, if the training the HR was something special needed, basically. I believe technology has never been a problem. We always had the wherewithal. And 2, if human resources, training them, is there a special need? I don't think there is anything special needed, because if we can actually design our applications on a complete human-centric design approach, where things are actually pretty simplified, and to get the data quality right, if we actually keep a lot of let me say a lot of options as drop downs, where they're only selecting something rather than typing something. That tackles it. So there is no challenge at all. The biggest challenge is the willpower of the bureaucracy, is the political will to basically rethink governance itself when it comes to scheme design as well as scheme delivery, both of it. So I would try to tell you a picture. You also visualize. A poor man coming to a BDO's office or a collector's office with a bag full of documents, all in polythene papers lying in his bag. And if you ask him, okay, why are you here for? He would say that I'm here to get the death and disability benefit for my son who died in this particular factory. So the first thing I'll ask is, okay, can you just show me the ration card? Then you'll ask him, can you show his PM report? Can you show me the Aadhaar card? Then he will show his Aadhaar card. He said, no, not your Aadhaar card. Can you show your son's Aadhaar card? We'll also check if the PM report mentions the Aadhaar number of the particular person who is there. So, the way we have created systems, the onus is on the beneficiary. So we need to radically rethink and take the onus on the government and not keep it on the beneficiary. To make things clear, I'll tell you, there are 4 major events in a person's life, in a family's life cycle, like birth, death, migration, and marital status. These 4 events, we did a research before going to this, before creating this project, we did a research as to what triggers services. And we found out that out of all the services from all the departments, there were 176 odd services which were directly linked to these 4 major events in a person's or in a family's life cycle. So if I get a trigger of birth, let me to give you to make the example clear, if there is a child born, I issue a birth certificate. And then later, if the same person comes to me and says, okay, let me add this child's name in the ration card, I would ask him a copy of the ration card, which I had issued earlier. I'll ask him a copy of the birth certificate, which I had issued to him, which I already own in my database. So I keep asking the citizen multiple documents for everything, the same documents again and again. I'm creating a lot of digital trash, scanned trash in servers. So here is where, if the moment that there is a birth that has been reported and it has been authenticated, the birth certificate is issued, the social registry will be updated and it will automatically trigger a name addition in the PDS database. It will automatically trigger the immunization cycle in the ICDS database. And as and when the child grows, the moment the child, if he or she is a child from the scheduled tribe community, if he or she is 10-year-old, the scholarship eligibility should be automatically triggered. So this is how we designed the whole project, where the onus of giving the benefit lies on the government and not the beneficiary, and the beneficiary will not apply for anything. So we need to fundamentally rethink governance itself. And currently, we have only one mechanism for regulating, the services, which is something called as a Public Service Guarantee Act, where we have time limits for every services. Here again, the time limit starts with from the date of application. This has to be shifted, and the onus should be shifted on the government to say that from the date of the occurrence of the event, it has to become 30 days or 45 days or whatever, it applies to. So I think we need to fundamentally radically rethink the way we are currently designing schemes and services. And let me come to this scheme. I'm taking 2 more minutes for the scheme design part particularly. We did a small case study recently to see how many labor families make up one PDS family. So we found out that on an average, there are at least 2 to 4 labor families make up one PDS family. So what am I trying to say here is the definition of a family, isn't being followed clearly in all of the scheme databases. So PDS is a different family, NRS is a different family, SCC is a different family. Government of India's family does not coincide with the with states' families. So let's define things clearly. For example, in PDS, the allocation is per family. So if we start rethinking the allocation on a per person basis, a lot of things becomes very easy, So there are 4 families registered as separate labor families. The husband is registered separately, the wife is registered separately. There is a small sub family within the Hindu family who are registered separately. All of this is happening because people want this benefit and they're genuinely entitled for it. We have created such scheme designs, and they're forced to basically cheat the government and make more registrations actually. So we need to look at, use the SECC database, which is computerized, and clearly redesign our schemes with an approach of the family as a unit, and what is the average size of the family unit, how many members, and try and see if we can shift the maximum benefits as individual benefits and not as group benefits. For example, NREGS, 100 days for a family, and the most deserving families are 13-member and 14-member families. And how do you justify giving 100 days to a 13-member family as well as to a 5-member family? So we need to fundamentally rethink the way we are designing our schemes and the way we are also delivering our schemes. That's my take on it.
Thanks, Alex. I'm actually going to go to Dr. Chaya Degaonkar. I hope I pronounced your name right, ma'am, who is the CEO, Chief Evaluation Officer at the Karnataka Evaluation Planning Government of Karnataka. But before I come to you, let me just summarize, I think, a few things that we heard just right now, which is one, it's clearly not a problem of technology, right? So the recommendation that's coming out of the Bright Spots report, which is let's try and create a registry. I think what some parlance calls a registry, others call an integrated database. The problem is not of APIs or of technology. The problem is essentially of institutional coordination. And I think, Alex, the idea that how do schemes essentially use data to be better designed, to be much more iterative. And also, I will again put on the table that if you compare India, it has 390 schemes. Similar countries such as Brazil have 15, China and Indonesia have around 10. So this gives you a sense that we have 390 vertical silos operating, where I know Karnataka is doing something very exciting to try and actually converge some of these approaches. So perhaps Dr. Degaonkar, now to you, could you tell us a bit about what Karnataka is trying to do? Because I understand there's an entitlement management system, if I understand that correctly. And we've actually been talking to Mr. Shri Rajiv Chawla as well in the government. Curious to hear from you what the design approach is, and also, ma'am, your thoughts on how can state schemes better coordinate with national schemes? Because currently there's a fair amount of duplication. You have pensions which are being topped up. I just mentioned Kerala has 400 state schemes, plus you have these national schemes. So it would be good to hear from you a bit about the Karnataka experience and your reflections on the current design between state and center. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and it's my really pleasure to join with this discussion. And I first would like to compliment Indus Action for bringing out such a very, very beautiful report, bringing out the realities, what happened actually during the COVID-19 period at the field level. And in fact, that has given a lot of insights to different states also, and including Karnataka. We had a brief discussion. In fact, I would like to share with you that I included a point in your report for today's budget speech and today's Niti Ayog's CM's remarks on the Niti Ayog discussion today. So basically, with regard to the rationalization of schemes, one thing, and the social protection, the integrated social protection. And I must say that Karnataka is a lead state in some of the issues, especially with regard to governance, as well as we can say the implementation of the schemes and programs. Karnataka is one of the only states in the country which is having Karnataka Evaluation Authority, which is an independent authority that evaluates government programs and schemes on a regular basis. And every scheme that has an outlay above 100 crores is to be evaluated if it is to be continued for the next 5-year plan period or next 3 years and all. So once the time period is over of the scheme, whether it is a central scheme or a state scheme, it is evaluated and the feedback is given to the government with regard to what are the realities at the field level. And in doing this type of exercises, we have, and I think 1 year back, we had given a recommendation to the government in, especially in the evaluation of this NRLM and NULM schemes and all, and this one skill development schemes. We said that there are too many schemes catering to a variety of, we can say, needs, and there is no integrated approach with regard to the skill development and the placements, etc. And as a result of this, actually at the field level, the impact is not visible. Either the adequacy of the amount, or we can say the implementation machinery at the field level, and also the scheme design. So we said that either bring all the whole schemes under the single umbrella and bring it under the Department of Skill Development, and that has been rather being now done in the government by the government of Karnataka, and all these skill related schemes are now brought under the Skill Development, Livelihood and Entrepreneurship Department. And these type of insights rather are given very often to government to rather rationalize the schemes, change the guidelines. For example, like Beti Bachao, we had a state scheme like Bhagya Lakshmi, which was rather used as a scheme for just marriage purpose of the girls. And the report clearly brought out that this is the use of the scheme and change the guidelines we suggested. And now we say that the age of the withdrawal is increased from 18 to 21 and so on. I just wanted to tell you that This is how the feedback is given to the government at different levels. And therefore, we are able to give now that a rationalization of the schemes is very, very essential. The government of India has done, it has tried to bring all the schemes under 28 umbrella schemes. Similarly, in the government of Karnataka, I was just listing today that how many schemes we have. We have about 368 crores, 368 schemes with the outlay less than 1 crore. And around 800 schemes with the outlay less than 10 crores. So if with these meager outlays and spread poorly, thinly over the geographical area, they are not able to make any significant impact. And therefore, what we are suggesting is now, as you suggested, that these schemes, wherever possible, have to be merged with the central schemes, so that the base is broadened and the impact is made more visible. The second point is that if the scheme is not functioning properly, either because of the implementation difficulties or the old model of the scheme, if there is no point in continuing the schemes, then the government is likely to take very shortly a decision with regard to either modification of the scheme or merging of the scheme or the closing of the scheme. So that is another option that we have kept before the government, that there are a number of schemes where evaluation reports show that they have not been able to make any significant impact. And the third important decisions that is in our list is that look at the integration of the schemes in a particular, say, focused approach, in a particular focused way. For example, that all social protection schemes to be brought together under a single umbrella. Maybe, see, even I was suggesting to the government that you can have a separate directorate of social protection. As we have Directorate of NREGA, we have a Directorate of Social Protection where all the schemes can be brought together under a single umbrella and can be implemented effectively. In fact, today only I have sent one suggestion to the government. In fact, along with Dr. Shalini Rajneesh, we together sent one suggestion to the government that instead of going to multiple schemes implemented by multiple departments, right now our focus is on the families which are below poverty line. So in Karnataka, the percentage is 20% of the families are below poverty line. And focus on these 20% families. From the SCCC data, we have brought out that what is the number of these families spread across the districts and the gram panchayats in the state. And then see, give all these schemes together as a package to the family, that find out what are their requirements. For example, giving some piecemeal schemes to each family. Some is given skill, some is given this one, some is given the horticulture scheme, some is given this. I said, when you want to have a scheme for the family, for example, the family is from a small and marginal family, having less than 1 hectare of land. We have the integrated farming system. Give the family integrated farming system. The children in the family should be brought under the coverage of Anganwadis below 3 years, and then different educational schemes, skill development schemes, and then the family should be brought under NREGA. So whatever package of benefits that can be offered by the government to a particular family to come out of the poverty. So finally, the goal should be very clear that we should come out of the poverty within a period of, we can say, 3 years, 5 years, whatever may be the case, depending upon the intensity of the poverty. So that's what we really are thinking about. And as you said about digitization, in fact, I would also like to share something about the database development and the data mining in Karnataka. We have been really doing very well in this field. We have, for example, Karnataka Open Data Initiative System. It is CODI. Now CODI has a database collected from all the different departments. CODI will be immediate. Now I think because of that pandemic, the work was a little bit staggered, but immediately I think within one or 2 months, the CODI is coming out with a big database platform, integrating the data from all the different databases, different departments. And therefore, then we have the decision support system. Now we are converting it into Avalokana. Avalokana is the perfect portal for monitoring the schemes. So all the central government schemes and the state government schemes are brought under Avalokana, that all these schemes, what is the expenditure, what is the beneficiaries covered and the progress, the targets fixed, etc. And now, as per the Niti Aayog's direction, we are now adding another column to the progress review, that is outcomes. So finally, what is the outcome that is reached in these various fields after spending so much amount of money? So this Avalokana portal will be also rather linked with so many other portals, for example, ease of doing business portal and all, so that we have at a time a system that can provide us details about the difficulties in implementation, the progress achieved and all in the different levels of schemes. So, and we have a partnership with the IIITB, International Institute of Information Technology, IIITB Bangalore, and the Public Affairs Center through a research center called as a Center for Open Data Research. So that is the whole big data analysis is being done for the policy support to the government on different issues. If you want to give me specific examples for this, later on I will give you in course of time. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, ma'am. No, that was extremely useful, and particularly I think 2 points. One, precisely picking up from what I think Alex was also saying, and it seems Karnataka is now going in that direction, which is to say it's not just about the database. Of course, the technology and the database exists, but it's actually thinking through how do you create essentially an umbrella package of social protection. And ma'am, actually something I'd like to share with you, I don't know if you're aware, but the World Bank has a development policy loan on PMGKY with the Ministry of Finance. Yes. So yes. And one of the key reform areas, in fact, in that is precisely what you just said right now. So I was particularly pleased actually to hear you also articulate it, which is similar to other countries, instead of having this siloed approach, why not have an umbrella? And also, unlike other countries, and in fact, in India, you have a Ministry of Health, you have a Ministry of Education. We don't have a nodal accountability structure for social protection, and it's so many different schemes. So can Niti Aayog or potentially some other organization, be it the DBT mission, essentially anchor some institutional platform? So ma'am, thank you. That was extremely useful. I'm sure you'll have questions during the Q&A. Let me come to Mr. Amit Kumar now, who is the head of inclusive growth at UNDP. I hope I got that right. Mr. Kumar, you've heard a lot from, I think, Dr. Degaonkar and Alex about there's a database, there are institutional issues to at least expand social protection. One additional issue that I'd like to bring to your notice, which I think came up during the presentations, is when COVID hit, and I remember, in fact, prior to COVID in December 2019, we had released a report called Schemes to Systems. And it's really unfortunate because in that report, we had talked about things such as portability, the migrants crisis, and I know the UNDP, I mean, there was a lot of discussion around these areas between different agencies. And then the pandemic struck and all of this became a horrifying reality, right? Because we saw the scenes that we did. And particularly in urban areas, I heard Shweta from Dalberg and others say that, the coverage has not been that high. In fact, we have a survey on the ground with CMIE, and the results will be out next month, which has tracked the PMGKY package and poverty impacts over the past year since the pandemic hit. And two things we're learning is, one, India now has this new category of what we're calling the new poor, and they're largely in urban areas, they're informal workers, and they have some higher level of education. So it's typically people in the gig economy who've lost jobs in hospitality. So I think you have a sense of, this is not the typical idea of poverty, right? That I think a lot of Indian schemes imagine when they're thinking of delivery. And that group seems to be completely missing if you look at the current scheme architecture, because there is really nothing. So one of the things we find is only 50% of urban populations are enrolled in any of the schemes. Number one, because while there's a NREGA, there's a PM Kisan in rural areas, there's no urban corollary. So I'd like you to perhaps reflect on how can inclusion in urban areas, particularly for this new kind of poor, be enhanced? And then your thoughts on the discussion that you just heard. Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Over to you.
Thanks, Shalini. And first of all, thank you, Madhuri and colleagues at Indus Action for really inviting. I'm happy to be here and also benefit from all the discussions. So I start at the 5:30, was just going through that and learned a lot. So Shalini, what you have said is absolutely right. That's the social protections, we try to see it from the lens of maybe a very classical rural-centric and poverty angle. But India specifically, if we look at the last 20, 30 years, had changed a lot, right? And specifically since the liberalizations. And all of us keep on talking that we need to really think of social protections in a very specific term for the urban, so-called urban poor, or maybe the term which you are coining, the new poor, which is basically a result of pandemic. And I think I don't have a solution that what could happen, but if I look at specifically the street vendor Swanidhi program, so I would take it as a kind of somewhere going into that directions, because many of these street vendors are specifically into these urban centers, and many of them are also the migrants poor. So that's one. But if I can take this discussions also a little bit two step back, overall social protections, I think the larger question for us is really to see the social protections from the complete life cycle kind of things, and also try to see that social protections we can try to classify into some of the 3 or 4 key buckets. So there are social protection measures which you are talking about: preventive, protective, and then promote, and then transform. So at what Alex was talking, giving the example that there are 4 major milestones in a family's things. So similarly, if we try to look into this aspect of that social protections, that which particular category of schemes is targeting what? So what are we doing to really prevent certain things that the people don't fall into these kind of things? Example being your health insurance, your crop insurance, these kind of things, these goes into that kind of directions. So when we come into this, and specifically just again trying to correlate with your urban poor stuff. So there is a need for what you call is definitely, I think I'm not going to over repeat the term that we are talking about, the data. For me, it's basically that's how does we enable an architecture and system where one data talks to other. So it's basically that because we have a very good data architecture, you have named few, you take Aadhaar, you take there. So India is having those kind of data sets, but only thing is that's how do we enable that kind of a one set talking to each other and getting auto filled in the way Alex was saying. However, what I can really bring in from the urban centric point of view, another dimensions, which is basically that's what we can do, and maybe picking up the larger question of what we are debating or discussing, this whole convergence issue. So when we are talking about convergence issues, I think comparing India to Brazil or some other country is good. However, we need to take into account also the bright spots in Indian social protection, like the right-based kind of things. So when we are looking into Manrega, when we are looking to right to education, so these are something that we won't find many examples internationally. But along with these bright spots, we have talked about it, there are parallel structures exist. Alex talked about BOCW just being one. If you take specifically to BD workers and those kind of things, so there are multiple structures which coexist. So I think talking about integrated moving towards from 400 to something 1 or 5 or 10 may be something that we can aim for in 10 years or 15 years. But if we take it as a kind of short-term approach to this, there are 3 or 4 things that's, in my opinion, we can try to take it. So one, can we think of start creating convergence within the different buckets of programs? So if there are different kinds of preventives, can you move towards 1 or 2, which goes into the preventive? If there are 2 or 3 similarly protective. So that's one. Second is basically that portability of schemes is very important. I think World Bank is doing a great work, and all of us are really interested into that whole one nation, one ration card. But I think along with this, can we also think about what are the other schemes which can become portable? And combining with that, it's again then how do you create, let's say, structure where a state government kind of one state really compensating for, let's say, other states when that particular state is providing the social protections for the people who have migrated. And these urban, what we're talking about, so because most of the people are coming to these urban centers. And if, let's say, people from Bihar moves to Mumbai, Maharashtra, and if the Maharashtra government is taking care of social protections for those, then can there be a mechanism where the Bihar government pays for that one? So I think that could also really enable, and of course, there is a need to bring in what you would call specific measures. I don't have an answer for that one. That's how it can really move towards elevating or protecting urban poor or new poor. So we keep on talking about urban Narega. I don't know if that's the solutions, because you also want to align Manrega with the other, and whether those opportunities exist in an urban setting or not. So these are the questions. And if you give me 30 seconds or 40 seconds, then I'll like to take this opportunity while I still have the flow, is while we talk about social protection, I think we should also need to think from some of the other disadvantaged groups. So when you're talking about LGBTC, when you're talking about people living with HIV, what are their needs and how really we also don't forget them? The way I think in one example, Dalberg Sweta was talking about, women have some different needs. So how do we really also, when we are moving toward an integrated, convergent approach, we also take into account of that? Because for social protections, I'll just end with, at the moment with this, there are 4 clear things that the government wants it to be cost effective, and the government wants it to result into a development outcome. And I think this convergence are going to make it cost effective, because you said about 2.5% or something that India spends, but even if we add educations, even if you add health, still our spending is not more than 7.5%. And in the last few years, we have not been increasing at a very minimal kind of incremental things. So that's basically, and for a person, basically what someone is looking for, that it helps in increasing their income or making them a basic minimum standards of life, and the schemes are predictable. And one point last, I had said it 2 times already, but this would be definitely the last one. That's again picking the Alex point about scheme design. And based on my experience working in 15, 20 years with different other departments, I think in scheme design, the schemes are designed not based on trust, but basically to really avoid, I think, the fraudulent behavior. And that leads to more fraudulent behaviors. I think if the bureaucracy, if the policymaker could really start believing and designing a scheme based on trust, and then you create mechanisms which is basically more of a checks and balances rather than trying to check and make every person's or every targeted people's life miserable. So I'll stop here and it will go back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar. That was extremely insightful. And I think in particularly what you said about the balance in India right now between protective schemes. And I think for those who, many on the call understand, these are schemes that essentially, if you're poor, they make sure that you don't fall further below the line. And then there are preventive schemes, which are, in fact, now in countries like India, where actually there's a large chunk which is very close to the poverty line. And I think the report mentions this as well. These preventive measures, be it insurance, be it some employment support, are extremely important because they make sure that people also have their own savings. Because perhaps a job is the best form of social protection, but in the absence of a good quality job, you need these kinds of measures. And I want to close by just highlighting that if you look at the current budget in India on social protection, we find only about 11% is spent on preventive, and 70% of beneficiaries are in the protective area. So I think those are very critical points. Let me close, I think, just summarizing with 2 or 3 points, just listening to everyone. I feel that this is a watershed moment, and I think the bright spots, I think there are so many bright spots, particularly related to the PDS, Narega, some of the large schemes that are functioning at scale, which have really come in, and they can be leveraged further to either as data assets or as last mile delivery assets, right? To create a system. But to do this, you need to do 3 critical things. And I think I'm just summarizing what I've heard from our 3 eminent speakers. One is you need to think through scheme design and better institutional coordination across different schemes, be it the way monies flow, be it the way data flows, be it the way people are organized. The second is there has to be some very hard thinking around the financing of social protection, because as I think Dr. Degaonkar and Mr. Kumar were also highlighting that we have, and I think Alex said this as well, there's a lot of money, but it's splintered across different places, and how do we consolidate that? And the third around, we need to think about balancing the current measures much more towards this new poor, right? Which could be urban informal workers, and perhaps the new labor code has started to do that. And that's a bright spot. So I'll close there and thank all the panelists and hand over back to Madhuri. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shrayana. And thank you so much to Alex, to Dr. Chaya, and to Amit for joining us today. We unfortunately have run out of time for a Q&A session. So if anyone does have any questions, you can send them to us and we'll send them to the three panelists with a request to respond to those questions if there are any. Thank you so much. If any of the panelists have any closing words, any remarks that you'd like to share, either of you.
Madhuri, just one closing word. The key word while designing schemes, while Ma'am Chaya spoke about one umbrella of schemes, it is not the number or it is not minimizing numbers that matters actually. What matters is, are we addressing the need in the life cycle correctly? And it might be a number of schemes, that doesn't really matter. Are we addressing the need in the life cycle is most important, and intersectionality is the key word which we need to look at when we're actually creating an umbrella. On every every tagline, every tag of intersectionality, we will have to add one more top up. I mean, a scheduled caste child with a disability will get more. A scheduled caste child with a disability and also being a transgender will get more. That's how we need to keep on adding top-ups, to the existing schemes as per the need. So I mean, that's from my side. That's it.
Just 1 minute. I would just like to say that, see, even the whole compartmentalism in the government, in the form of departments, has to go off, and all should have to work, because the whole approach is definitely integrated. And I really say that they should be aligned with the sustainable development goals, so that we can have a better implementation and achievement of these goals. I really thank Indus Action for bringing out this report and this discussion also, which I might have enlightened to so many people in the country and all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Madhuri. No closing words from my side. Alex and Dr. Chaya has already done that. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And I'll hand over to Tarun to just close today's session.
Thank you, Madhuri. So thanks everyone for making it on a Saturday evening. We were unsure, given that today's World Social Justice Day, we thought today was a good day to kind of launch the report, but we are very encouraged by all of you showing up for the event and for sharing kind of your learnings and also your valuable insights. So we are very encouraged by the discussion and kind of the concern and commitment shown by everyone. So very quickly, I want to thank all the speakers today. So of course, Madhuri and Indus Action team, especially co-authors Pragnya, Andres, and Devin for leading these efforts in the last 6 months and collaborating very closely with all the 5 organizations. So I want to thank Santosh, Tanya, Shweta, Nishant, and Dr. Ravi as well for making it today and sharing a glimpse of the chapters. So I'd encourage everyone to read the report and please give us feedback so we could kind of incorporate that into the next edition. I want to also thank Dr. P.V. Ramesh for giving us time today and launching the report. So sir, we'll get back to you and definitely kind of meet you in person to discuss more in detail around kind of the design for an integrated social protection architecture. And finally, I want to thank all our panelists. First, Shrayana for leading a very rich and kind of motivating discussion. And Alex sir, Chaya ma'am, and Mr. Amit for sharing their experience and wisdom. So thank you, everyone. Thanks again to all the participants for making time on a Saturday evening. So I hope on the kind of on the mark of Social Justice Day. So we could kind of draw inspiration from all the learnings we've had and kind of also draw inspiration from the vision all the speakers have shared, so that when we kind of maybe convene once again sometime in next year on World Social Justice Day, we made kind of significant progress to enable social protection for vulnerable families in India. So thank you on behalf of Indus Action.
Thank you, Tarun.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.